Alright, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over the glomerulus, which is part of the nephron. So a little overview of what we're going to do in this video. First, I want to tell you about the anatomy of the glomerulus and all the barriers that it comes with. Then I'm going to tell you about what can cross the filter and what stays in the blood. Then we're talking about filtration pressure, so I'm going to talk about the blood hydrostatic pressure, colloid osmotic pressure, also known as oncotic pressure, capsular pressure, and net filtration pressure. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about glomerular filtration rate, also known as GFR. So if you're going to become a doctor, planning to become a doctor, taking the MCAT, becoming a nurse, anything like that, this video is super important. And I'll mention why in a second. So the glomerulus is all about filtering the blood. That's its main job. So the renal corpuscle is this entire piece right here. The glomerulus is the inside portion, this wavy looking portion right there. So all of this right here, this wavy looking thing, tube looking structure, is the glomerulus. The outside layer is the glomerular capsule, and both the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule, also known as the Bowman's capsule, is the renal corpuscle. Now within the glomerulus, there are three barriers, and these barriers are what does the filtering. So blood that needs to be filtered comes in from the afferent arteriole. So this blood vessel right here. Blood is entering and going this way. The blood enters and it goes through the glomerulus. On top of the glomerulus are certain barriers. And these barriers is what does the filtering. Now stuff that is not filtered passes through the entire glomerulus and exits out the efferent arteriole. So stuff that is not filtered out. Now, stuff that is filtered out joins the interstitial space here and goes down into what will become the PCT, or proximal convoluted tubule. So let me choose a different color. So this stuff right here, that proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT. So stuff that is filtered out will join the PCT. And stuff that enters the PCT will either be reabsorbed or become into urine. So the three barriers are called fenestrated endothelium, basement membrane, and filtration slits, also known as podocytes. The filtration slits are actually really interesting. So they're made up of podocytes, and podocytes are basically cells that look like frogs. They basically have legs that extend over the arteriole and help filter. So you'll notice that there are little these looking things that look like they have legs. They stretch over the arteriole and they help filter. So you're probably wondering, what is getting filtered? So let me talk about what stays in the blood first. So what are stuff that cannot pass through the filters or the barriers? So blood cells cannot pass. It would be really bad if blood could pass through and then you would pee out blood. That would be really bad. And this can be a thing. If this does happen, please go to the ER. This is actually a real big emergency. You could die if you were to pee out blood. Blood needs to stay in the vessels, not be filtered out and peed out eventually. Plasma proteins as well. So enzymes are proteins. It would be really bad if you were to pee out enzymes because we need these stuff to actually do reactions in our body. But also plasma proteins are too big to actually cross the filtration slits or whatever barrier we're talking about. Large anions cannot pass through. So this would be like bicarbonate, for example, HCO3. This is an anion. This cannot pass through. Also, protein-bound hormones like T3 and T4. These are thyroid hormones. Don't need to worry about it, but just protein-bound hormones can also not cross. And also large molecules that are greater than 8 nanometers cannot cross. They stay in the blood. Now, what can pass through the barriers and enter the nephron to be to be turned into urine? So water, you pee out water. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and chloride. Glucose is a big one. People that have diabetes actually pee out glucose. Urea is toxic. Amino acids. So what I mean by amino acids, I mean before they're actually made into proteins, because proteins are too big, but amino acids, they make up proteins, but amino acids themselves are so small they can pass through and be filtered out. As well as fatty acids as well can be passed through the filter and enter the nephron, which will be the PCT. Now let's talk about filtration pressure. So this entire mechanism of filtering is all about pressure. So notice that we have 4 different pressures here. We have BHP, COP, CP, and NFP. So let's start with the beginning, which is BHP, also known as blood hydrostatic pressure. So pressure of the blood coming into the glomerulus. So blood is actually pushing against the capillaries, which generates pressure. So blood is entering through here. Well, what actually happens, the blood is pushing against the capillaries here. And when this happens, it generates pressure outwards like that, which pushes into the glomerulus like that. And that's basically the very shortcut of what BHP is. By the way, if you're taking the MCAT, they love to ask about these kind of questions. They love pressure questions like this. Now, colloid osmotic pressure, also known as oncotic pressure, is the pressure generated by proteins. So this is all about osmosis. So there are more proteins in the blood plasma than the interstitial fluid. The interstitial fluid is this space around here. Because remember, proteins cannot be filtered, so it stays in the plasma. Well, by process of osmosis, water likes to go where there's a high concentration of solutes. So say if we have, let me draw this. So say if we have proteins here, and this is the interstitial space, and this is the blood. The yellow stuff is proteins, so let me draw proteins here. Protein. Okay, by power of osmosis, water wants to be pulled in this way, because this is what osmosis does. It's the movement of water towards an area of higher solute, the solute being protein. So this pulling of water is what generates something called oncotic pressure. So that's why the COP arrow is going this way. Because the water is being pulled in this way towards, that's messy, towards, I probably can't even see that. Hold on, let me redraw this. Sorry about that. Let me do a different color, green. So water from the interstitial fluid is being pulled this way towards the proteins, which is located in the blood. This is like the shortcut to oncotic pressure. A lot of people really struggle with oncotic pressure, the different types of pressures. This is the way to, I think is the best way to explain it. It's basically osmosis. Okay. The capsular pressure is the pressure of the actual capsule itself, because it's very strong and fibrous. So it actually generates pressure that pushes blood away. So it's basically really thick skin here. And it causes pressure buildup and pushes the blood away. Okay, And then what do? Is with all these three pressures, you can calculate the net filtration pressure, which is BHP minus, and in parentheses, COP plus CP. So it's basically the stuff coming in minus the stuff going out. The pressure going in minus the pressures going out. That's all it is. And it should generate a positive number. And that's the pressure that's going to enter the PCT and the nephron itself. If it was a negative pressure, that would be bad because nothing would be filtering in because it's all about pressure. Now we're going to talk about glomerular filtration rate. The reason this is important is because if you're going to become a doctor or a nurse, this is one of the blood tests that you can do. It's very common in the that they can measure. So if you ever get a blood test, look at the results. You may see something called GFR. This is glomerular filtration rate. This filtration rate is basically determined of all of these pressures. And it tells the doctor or the physician or the nurse how much is being filtered out. This is why it's super, super important. So if the pressure is too high, if this pressure, NFP, is too high, we have a high GFR or glomerular filtration rate. This can cause problems with reabsorption later in the pathway. And urine output is going to rise because we're not reabsorbing anything. And this can lead to dehydration or electrolyte depletion. Now, if the GFR is too low, if this number is too low, waste can actually be reabsorbed. So we can actually get toxic stuff into our blood. This can actually cause acidosis. It can cause a bunch of things. But very commonly, it can cause something called azotemia, or high nitrogen in the blood. There are three ways to actually regulate GFR. And I'm going to make a whole video on this later on. But just as an overview right now, we can do renal autoregulation, which is actually really cool, sympathetic control, and hormonal control. So the renal autoregulation actually has to do with these two vessels right here. It's super, super cool. I'm not going to ruin the surprise, but it is really cool. There's also sympathetic control and hormonal control, which I'll talk about a little later. But if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. And until next time, later.